Hi everyone, welcome to week 13. So this week we are going to be finishing up our research project part 1, and our goal is to get our last two required sources, which is a documentary and a podcast. Both a documentary and a podcast are sources that could be like quite long, right? And so I just want to make sure you know that I don't expect you to like watch the whole documentary or podcast or listen to it. You can usually do something like find a good quote from the transcript and or the trailer if you're doing like a feature-length film type of documentary. So like if you look at my documentary, it's on the rebellious life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, which is like a real feature-length type of film documentary. You can also use a YouTube video for this. So when I'm citing it, I'm going to cite starting with the director's last name, first name. And then if you have two directors like I did, then you'll just want to put the next person in, written out this way. And then if you have more than two, then you want to put et al. And then you're just going to do comma, director or directors, and then the title in italics, the streaming site, the date, and then where it's streaming, so that URL. When you're trying to get a quote, you can either get a quote from the trailer or you can get a quote from, if you're doing a YouTube video, from the transcript. And it's going to be really similar with our podcast. And so if you are finding a podcast from someplace like Apple Podcast or Spotify, for example, then you're going to want to start the citation with the host's name. And it'll be like, just like with the documentary with director, it'll be last name, first name, and then comma, and then host for the podcast. And then in quotation marks, because for the podcast, you're probably going to have an episode of a podcast, right? Like not the whole podcast. So then you'll say, here's the podcast episode. Claudette Colvin doesn't give up her seat. That's in quotation marks. And then history this week is the name of the podcast itself. That's in italics. Then comma, the date. And this one, I guess I just have the month. And then Spotify, that's going to be in italics because it's the streaming site. And then you're going to have the full URL after that. Um, for the summary, you can usually read like the caption or episode description. A lot of podcasts have episode websites. And then a lot of times, most podcasts, I believe, are going to have a transcript. And that's where you can find a good quote. So that way you don't have to like listen to the podcast and like type it out, verbatim, which can be really hard. Okay. Make sure before you turn in your research project part 1, so those are due Sunday, make sure before you do that, that whenever you have a quote, you're putting the author's last name in parentheses after the quote, because that is something that I'm going to be grading for. And so you should always have an in-text citation. It's one of the things I want you to get some practice on for this project. And then the other thing that a lot of people do forget is to put their citations down here in the works cited page. A lot of you have been submitting assignments through text box entries rather than putting them on the form, which is fine. But one thing that can happen is that then you forget because you're kind of scrambling to get everything back into the form. And so make sure that you do fill this out. It's worth 4.5 points out of your total grade. And so you'd automatically get a 0 if you have no sources cited there on that out of 4.5, which is going to, majorly affect your grade. And so I would just say, make sure that you do that. It's okay if you miss like one thing here or there, but I would say another big thing that some people do, and I really want to make sure you don't do, is they skip sources 9 and 10 because there aren't required types. Keep in mind, both of these sources, they can be any type of source, including repeats of sources that we've already covered, like a podcast, for example. Let's say you find 2 great podcast episodes, you could put one of them for source 10. All right. I think that's everything for this week. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have a great week.